what you've probably noticed is in the springtime, you have a lot of brood in your boxes, lots of capped brood, and as you go through the summertime, the population starts to peak, and as the population declines, the queen will stop laying as much and kind of balance out that population. But what happens is the mites in the beginning of the season, they hide under the capped cells. They like to go into the capped cells or into the larva cell on like about day 5 after an egg hatches, and they'll stay in there and they'll feed on the bee bread, the food that they give the young larva. And so once they're done eating that larva, they'll start, or eating the food, they'll attach to the larva, and then that cell will cap, and they'll start to reproduce. The mites, the female that goes into this cell, into the capped cell, will lay 4 to 5 eggs, a male egg and 4 females. They'll start to mate, so that one mite that goes into your cell gets capped will come out with 5 mites, and 4 of them will be pregnant. So your numbers exponentially towards the end of the summer, as all these bees are coming out of their capped cells, will start to have mites overrun them. So what we do during late summer is we monitor them to see how high the numbers are, and if they meet a certain threshold. In our operation, out of we take a bee sample with, we take a sample of half a cup of bees leveled off, and it's about 300. And out of that sample, we only want to see 6 mites or less. If we see, 5 mites or less. If we see 6, which is our threshold, or more, we'll treat at that point. The other thing, when I'm going in to look for what frames we want to shake bees from, we're looking for the outside of the brood chamber. So if you have 10 frames in your box, the outside few frames are going to have usually less amount of brood on them. The queen tends to lay in the middle and expands outwards. So we're looking at taking the edge of the frame, so we're not disrupting the middle of the brood where there's more capped brood and potentially the queen, because we don't want to accidentally get the queen into our alcohol. You'll notice there's a few types of mite cups, and they're all basically the same. They have a screen in here, it's like a double cup system, and a fill line. So we're going to fill up to the fill line with alcohol, and if you have a cup like this that you make homemade, you would fill it up to, basically you want it just above where the bees, when you put the bees in here, you want them to be about completely covered with the alcohol.
Which alcohol are you using there?
This is 91% isopropyl, okay, which we find good luck. We've had good luck with anything above like 71% or 72, I think is what they sell it in. All right. So I can just keep this as our setup table. Put these on. When I'm working somebody else's hives, gloves are a very good idea. You don't necessarily need gloves for this. What I'm going to do is ask for another volunteer, probably Dale, to come and do a queen check behind me. So I'll check for the queen, then I'll give the frame to him, since they're your queens.
Right.
All right, one of the things to obviously think about whenever we're working hives is to work them from behind. It's no different when you're doing these mite washes. They'll be much less agitated if you're not standing in front doing all the work. Now we're not gonna, I know there's no bees and no brood in here, and that means there's no nurse bees, which is who we're gonna sample from. So I'm just gonna pop the whole thing and set it aside.
I've been gluing down pretty good this year.
We're gonna take the queen excluder off.
Got some heft to it, Joe?
A little bit.
That one does, yeah. Some of them are pretty light. That one's...
And what I like to do whenever I'm working hives, no matter what I'm doing, I'll pop the outside frame to give myself some room. to work the rest of them. When I'm talking about pull a frame from the outside of the brood chamber, if you look in here, you can see the majority of the bees are going to be in this hive right about in here. So I'm going to look for frames like this one or maybe this one to pull from. But I just want to get this one out. When things get real tight, go real slow so you're not rolling bees. The queen could be on this frame. Not likely, but she could be. And I just do a quick check to see, because I'm going to set this one down. Alright, now we're going to go look for some brood and a frame to pull. I like to pull frames that have a lot of pollen on them. Now this time of year there's not a lot of pollen available, so sometimes you have to go with ones that have a little bit of brood, young brood. But you don't want to pull frames that are just honey. You don't want to pull frames that are completely capped brood on both sides, because you're not going to have a lot of nurse bees. And this one has a little bit of pollen on it up in here. So we'll look for the queen. I'll probably take that next one and use that one as the sample. But if I pull a frame out, I still like to check for the queen. That way if I see her, I don't have to worry about the other ones. I can just pull them and kind of go. So again, everything is nice and smooth, slow movements. Alright, I think I'll shake this one. We have a little bit of pollen up here. The queen has laid some eggs, but there's not a lot of brood, but there's a lot of bees. So when you take your sample, you also want to pull a frame that has a decent amount of bees, so you don't have to shake multiple frames, which you have to do if you don't get to that 300 number of bees. Alright.
So I know nurse bees have more hair, they're furrier, but how do you know that those are more nurse bees than...
We'll know when we shake them, because the nurse bees will stay in the bucket, and we do a trick to get the older bees out of our way so we don't accidentally get them in.
I like the gentleness of them, calm.
Mm-hmm. So when I'm out in the field, I have my wife do the same thing. I'll look at it, she'll look at it. If we both sign off, we can shake. We get one more chance to look for the queen before we put it in. You looking good? So give me a little smoke just at the top. What the smoke will do is drive the bees down. They'll start to eat a little bit of honey, but if you notice that a ton of them are balling up here, you need to put this up right on top. So you just you want them to get down into the hive so you're not crushing a bunch of them. We put the bucket right over the hive when we shake. And this is important. You don't want to drop these frames when you're shaking for obvious reasons, but you also don't want to bang this into the bucket when you're doing it. So what I find is index fingers under these little ears, and then thumb on top gives you really good control. You can move the hive around, from that point you can do whatever you need to do, but it's also going to be good for the quick shake. So we do a quick snap of the wrist. You'll see this doesn't elicit any defensive behavior right now. They're just a little confused because I shook them in here. So you could give them a shake. So what you're seeing is a lot of foragers, or a lot of older bees, because they're flying out of here. So what I'm going to do is shake another, because we need some younger bees. So what we'll do is just grab one more. Want to make sure we have enough for our shake. This time of year there's not going to be a ton of young bees, so we have to be aware of that. There she is. So the queen's right there.
Oh, I see her from here.
You see her? So what we're gonna do, I'm gonna put her right back here. I'm gonna pull this next one. There's some pollen on here. So this should be good. And the queen was on the other one. So I do just to confirm one last time. Shake. And then I immediately go back into the hive and push everything back together, because at this point this hive's good to go. So I'll leave them open sometimes, because if we're doing treatment, I'll want to put a treatment on there. So I give the older bees a chance, one last chance to go back to the hive. Little shake, see them all fly out? Now we go over here. And this is where we want to do this fairly quick, because the bees will climb right out of here pretty quick. So you'll knock them down to a corner, level off one, close this lid right away, and I go and dump these bees immediately back in that we don't use. Since Dr. Kilmer's not going to be treating, I'll just put this back. Should disturb them a little bit less.
Is that
Excuse me.
after this?
That one is, I only have a couple of things. Honey, and I'd say 3 or 4.
You want to make sure your lid's on nice and tight. And then for 30 to 45 seconds, we want a vigorous swirl. Don't shake up and down. Swirl them and the mites will come through the screen. You can already see them, lots of them.
I wanted to give you one really good example.
This is what all my hives look like, by the way. Right now, the mites are pretty bad this summer. And this is when you'll see the most mites too, because all the bees are outside of the capped cell. When we're doing these washes, you don't get any of the mites inside the capped cell, so you got to take your wash and realize how many bees were actually outside of the capped cell that we could have access to with the sample. So one thing that I do, we want to capture, since alcohol is expensive, we want to capture everything and reuse it. So what I do is I have another cup right here, and I'll just strain this back into here and we'll just reuse. We can keep reusing this, we just want to make sure that the mites are strained out. That's pretty good. So at this point, we can slowly pull the thing out. If we're using the other style, it's the same thing. You want to slowly pull the tray out. Now some people get really crazy and they'll count the bees to make sure that they have the sample. We just go with a level off, and it's basically just a gauge to let us know if we've reached threshold. So I'll pour the alcohol back, but not the mites, just makes it a little easier to count. If you guys, here, I'll put it over this white right there, and all those little red things in there are mites. And since it's over 6, it would reach our threshold and we would treat this hive.
How many number?
6 for our operation. Everybody has a different way. We follow Randy Oliver's method. He showed me how to do this. I did a lot of mite washes with him a few years ago, and it's a really efficient way just to get a quick sample. And then at this point we count, we record. Count, record, then you can just dump everything back. You got all your mites, you can just discard them.
Does that kill them?
This, yeah, they'll be dead in here. And then what we can do is put our bucket, go back up to the fill line. We lost about that much alcohol. So we were able to recapture almost all of it. And now you're on to your next one. So recording's very important. We'll mark usually just on the top of the lid. So we know each hive. It's really easy to find. At this point, we'll do a treatment, and whatever treatment it was, we'll come back within the recommended time to either continue treatment, or if the treatment's complete, we'll do another wash to see how effective it was. And at that point, if we still are reaching our threshold, we might consider treating again, because we want to get into winter with really low mites because of how fast that they can reproduce and take over your whole hive. So are there any questions at this point?
Should you do this after you take your honey off?
No, you can do this while honey's on. You got to be careful treating when your honey supers are on. And we can talk a little bit, once we're done with the wash, we can talk a little bit about some of the treatments we use.